Thank you all for sticking around for our next panel, which is going to be a great conversation about small modular reactors and deploying them. It's an energy imperative that we'd like to talk about today, and we're very grateful to be joined by Dr. Rita Baranwal, the Chief Nuclear Officer of Radiant Nuclear and the former Assistant Secretary of Energy for Nuclear Energy. Adrienne Schweer, the Head of Government Affairs at OKLO, and J.T. Kraft, Director of the Army Nuclear Energy Office and Janus Project, moderated by Alex Kaufman of Field Notes and author of Heatmap Daily. Please welcome our panelists to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I've been really looking forward to this panel, and if you will grant me the opportunity to try to ask one of my more grenade-like questions at the beginning to get everyone excited again at 2 p.m. on the final day. I'd like to ask a really fundamental question about SMRs, and not, from an anti-nuclear perspective at all, but from the perspective of those who are large reactor hardliners, to the folks who say that all efforts in, this burgeoning nuclear renaissance should be focused on AP1000s or ABWRs. What do you say to them? And what do you say to them about the ability to actually achieve these cost curve reductions, through the assembly line repetition in a way that matches or exceeds what we were able to do historically through economies of scale with larger reactors? And I'll start with you, Dr. Baranwal.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much for having us. To answer the question on what you would say to maybe the naysayers or the folks that are have questions about something other than gigawatt scale reactor, and the answer is really simple. We need all of it. We need gigawatt scale, we need SMRs, we need micros. There is so much demand, not only in this country, but globally for clean energy, that we need every single tool in the nuclear toolbox. That said, the smaller reactors are going to be faster to deploy, and you're seeing that now. Antares just reached criticality. There's a couple other companies coming up on that, including Radiant. We will go critical this summer. We will then go to 1 megawatt thermal also this summer. We will then go to full power and full temperature also this summer. And then we will operate at 150 hours continuously without any operator intervention also this summer. So the reason why all of that is important, those are our 5 phases for reactor deployment, and all of that will happen at Idaho National Lab this summer. The reason why that's important is that our next customer is the Space Force. So we're deploying at Buckley Space Force Base just outside of Denver, Colorado in 2028. And so it is really important to be able to demonstrate that we can deploy the concept that we can test the concept and have it be successful so that it is ready for the next deployment. So that's military applications, Buckley. Then you talk about remote communities. A 1 megawatt reactor, which is what our Kaleidos reactor is, can power about 1,000 American homes. When you deploy that globally, it's a lot more homes. So remote communities, islanded communities, as well as being able to provide for disaster relief. So when we talk about just in the United States, think about wildfires, think about hurricanes, think about tornadoes. This is a technology that can be brought in and installed within 48 hours and be able to be providing disaster relief as well. So a lot of different applications. Gigawatt scale has its place. So do larger scaled SMRs, as do, hopefully I've just illustrated, microreactors.
Well, I'll take a stab. I agree with Rita entirely that there's room for everybody. There's plenty of demand, and there's plenty of demand for clean, dispatchable energy, which is nuclear is the best solution for that. The history of light water reactors, and there are over 100 that operate safely here in the U.S. and provide really important baseload energy for our country, is that in the last couple sets of decades, it's been really expensive, really long timelines to build. And that's why you need to look at smaller modular reactors so you can finance it at a lower capex rate, you can move faster on construction, and you can bring electrons to bear. And what modular brings is that you're maybe building multiple, but you're starting with 2 and then building another 4, and eventually you get to gigawatt scale. The other really important element is that a lot of the historical fleet are cooled with water, and you need to be paired with a body of water to provide nuclear to that community. And that doesn't exist for a lot of the markets and the interest on the customer side that we're seeing in the nuclear environment, which is why sodium-cooled fast reactors and some of the advanced reactor technologies are so exciting. Not only do they not need to be paired with a body of water, but they have an inherent safety profile. For reactors like mine, you can terminally recycle our spent nuclear fuel, which reduces the back end side of the fuel cycle. So there's a lot of value to having many different types of reactors move in the space.
Okay, so my responsibility is to put these microreactors onto U.S. Army and other military installations. This is a question that we anticipate we're going to get. Fundamentally, the underlying technology is advanced and radically different to what perhaps your average person understands is nuclear energy. And that's fundamentally the message that I'm responsible to sending to the communities that are on those installations in the surrounding community. That, as my colleagues here have addressed, the technology is different. The passive safety features that come along with these Gen 4 reactors, and the fact that the emplacement considerations that we had to deal with before aren't necessarily true here. Candidly, are relatively easy to grasp. I am not a nuclear engineer by training, and even I understand this. And that's how the Army intends to respond to those questions, is by communicating exactly the fundamental differences between what we've been using before and why these systems, as we develop this technology, will meet the demands of installation and critical mission resiliency.
So what, on the policy front, what would you consider to be the most significant policy changes that have happened outside the NRC, within the federal government, and then within the NRC?
So outside the NRC, I think the streamlining of the DOE authorization process has been a huge help for the industry. You're seeing faster authorization for these advanced reactors. And I'm only going to talk about the smaller advanced nuclear reactors, because there are benefits to the larger ones as well, but that's not what this panel is about. So it's faster authorization, and I want to emphasize that does not mean taking shortcuts. I am participating, and I think a couple of us are as well. We're participating both in the DOE authorization process and the NRC authorization process. Both are exceptionally grueling. And so if someone claims that we're taking shortcuts, I don't know where they're getting that, because it is absolutely top-notch in terms of the staff that is provided to review our documentation, provide feedback to it, both from the NRC and the DOE. I'm not going to take up too much NRC bandwidth, because I know you get to hear from Chairman Nee right after us, so we'll let him speak about his organization. But the streamlining of that has been phenomenal. We're already starting to see the fruits of that labor. Those regulations historically were written for larger scaled reactors, and they don't apply to smaller reactors, because you have what's basically a lower source, low dose consequence, a smaller source term, less fuel in the reactor. And so you need to have more appropriate regulations for regulating that technology. So grateful to see those regulations streamlined. And then as we get within the NRC, very applicable to microreactors is the launch of the proposed rule called Part 57. And that is really geared towards deploying microreactors and the ability for some of these reactors to be portable and for some of these reactors to be shipped with fuel, both new fuel and used fuel, if you have appropriate features to prevent criticality in them. So grateful for all of that streamlining, but I do want to emphasize that no shortcuts are being taken.
I would just add that during the Biden administration, President Biden signed into law the ADVANCE Act, a very bold bipartisan policy to help improve the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that has been implemented over the last year and a half. And during the implementation of that, President Trump launched 4 executive orders on nuclear that had hundreds of policy unlocks across the interagency, created his job. And I think the DOE authorization is probably the most consequential, but only thing Rita didn't say is that it is not new at all. The DOE has been licensing reactors for decades upon decades. There are hundreds that operate in the country. There's one underneath Notre Dame's football field. Like, they exist. It's really safe. And as you go through the NRC licensing process, one thing most people don't know is that the NRC contracts out a lot of the safety and environmental reviews through their process to the same DOE expert staff in the labs that are doing all of the work on our DOE licensing and authorization for these test and research reactors. So it's not new. It's not taking shortcuts, but it is accelerative. And if you are not a nuclear, then you probably don't understand the magnitude of what Rita said her company is doing just this summer and under a 12-month cycle, and the things my company is able to do. I mean, we built an entire reactor that will also go critical this summer in less than 10 months to reshore the production of American isotopes. And there is so much that American nuclear is doing that it hasn't been able to do in the past because you could not construct at risk. And with small modular reactors, we can take the CapEx and construct at risk. We're not talking about a $10 billion build of an AP1000. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars in some cases that allow us to build at the same time, not do anything nuclear safety related without full safety and authorization, but it accelerates the time to finish. And every single one of us going through that, all 11 projects, are learning incredible, important things for our final product that we would have learned at the very end of decade plus of work with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So they're extremely additive, and it will be the story that is told decades from now about what unlocked the nuclear renaissance that you've been talking about for a long time.
Do you have a sense of how many years participation in that program has shaved off the process had it not been there?
Yeah, I'll put it into example. So we have a 75 megawatt electric reactor that we've been in 10 years of work, due diligence with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on. We were nearing the kind of final submission at the time when these opened up. We transitioned that asset to move over into DOE authorization to get some test and research and be able to construct at risk. And we'll turn on in early 2028, and we'll be able to go through tons of milestones that could have potentially been delayed based on regulator choices and regulator process as opposed to company choices and company process. But I don't know that, America, if anybody's seen the movie Oppenheimer, when he was losing his security clearance, it was because he was trying to export radioisotopes, a really critical, important element that you need nuclear machines and nuclear processes to make. We make very few of them in the US. So there are isotopes that underpin brachytherapy for breast cancer and are in every aviation and aerospace system in the country, and 99% of them are produced in Russia and China, and we need to reshore that. And we certainly would not have built a reactor to scale in 10 months without this authorization process.
Well, just briefly, I want to echo those points, right? It's not so much policy changes as it is policy unlocks. And the Army, for the first time, and in a very long time, it intends to license and permit our own reactors. Those policy unlocks really are the catalyst for it to allow us to actually make that a reality.
So if you can talk a little bit about the choices that you made in the designs that you're using for coolants, where the advantages are. We kind of spoke broadly about the advantages of other coolants other than water, but what the advantages of those specific coolants are, and around your fuel choices, and how you anticipate those fuel choices factoring into that NRC licensing process, especially given the risk-informed components in parts 53 and part 57.
Sure. So the fuel choices that we have made at Radiant include using TRISO fuel, which is if you can envision a poppy seed, that's the size of a TRISO particle. Inside that, though, the kernel is uranium. And I can barely see his hands, but anyone eaten a gobstopper and looked at the cross-section? Yeah? Okay, so if you take the cross-section of a TRISO particle, it looks like a gobstopper. You've got uranium in the middle, and then layers of carbon and silicon carbide to contain the fission products that are generated once you sustain a critical reaction, a chain reaction. You've got that TRISO particle, and we use that in compact form. So it's really just almost like a 1-inch slug that goes into monoliths that go into the reactor. The reason we chose TRISO, and as a fuel person who's spent almost 30 years in this industry, it is the least energy dense kind of fuel. So it's a little bit causes me a little friction internally, but the reason we chose that fuel is because of those layers and the defense in depth that you have around the uranium. And so you've already got 4 layers of defense in depth just with that little poppy seed triso particle. You put it into graphite, you put it into monoliths, you've already got half a dozen layers of defense in depth. That's really important because we want to transport this on road, on rail, on the seas, and by air. We also have visions after our terrestrial applications to launch this into space. To be able to launch something into space requires a lot of extra safeguards and security to be baked into your design, and TRISO allows for that. So that's the fuel. And the coolant, we are using helium in our KDU test at INL this summer. The reason for helium is that it does not become activated should there be a leak. We don't anticipate a leak, but you again have to design for those scenarios where if there were something to happen, what would be the consequence? And should there be a leak, it doesn't get activated. So there would be no impact to the workers or the public.
So at OKLO, our founders, when they were studying at MIT, when you're a student in nuclear engineering, you have access to novels of old test reactors that the DOE and the US government ran over the years. And they found these amazing sets of research on reactors that American research institutions had ran at scale for decades that had an inherent safety profile. You could pull the safety rods out and effectively walk away and the reaction would settle itself. And there was one that ran for 40 years until the early 1990s in Idaho called EBR-2. If you haven't seen it or learned about it, it is one of the coolest things. But it was a sodium-cooled fast reactor. And so we are essentially commercializing that technology that sat on the shelf with hundreds of operating years of experience because of its safety profile, but most importantly, because we believe and we are very excited about the potential of recycling our own spent nuclear fuel. So many of you know that we have spent nuclear fuel all over the country. The current fleet of reactors use about 5% of the energy-bearing material, and the uranium, when it enters the reactor and then it goes into canisters, every single ounce of that is accounted for. It's never caused an issue for American health and safety. It is the coolest waste management system on the planet, but it also has a ton of energy-bearing material that can be recycled. America invented the technology to reprocess spent nuclear fuel. We offshored it to the French, the Chinese, the Russians, many others do it. We don't, and we are reshoring that with a modernized version of pyroprocessing. So as fresh uranium or HALEU goes into our early reactors, the waste profile that comes out of it can use a pyroprocessing or electrochemical processing facility to then become fresh fuel to go back in, which means that we dramatically reduce the long-term waste storage and management that nuclear could have. And that in and of itself reduces cost over time dramatically because nuclear fuel, America used to mine, enrich, and convert more uranium than the world combined, and we do almost none today. So nuclear fuel is as big of a problem as any of the other design and regulatory elements in the ecosystem. I think many administrations, and this one has finally made some awards that will reshore production and enrichment for the nuclear fleet, and I'm very excited about that. But recycling spent nuclear fuel is a massive unlock, and fast reactors like mine can leverage it.
So I want to jump to the next question, and I'll start with you. Where do you see the biggest gap still in the domestic supply chain, and where do you see the biggest gaps then in policy to help support changes that will address those?
So the biggest gaps right now, right? So when I take a look at the responsibility of fielding this capability to improve that resiliency on military installations, is the lack of fuel. That's the biggest thing, and then the return to the United States of our ability to produce, refine, put those materials into a condition that allows us to get after that. I don't know that there's a policy issue that's entailed. It really comes down to political will, the will of our country to get after these things, and until we get that and we get momentum there, that's going to be that's what's going to continue to keep me up at night as we try to get after this capability for our installations.
I would have said the same. I'm pretty optimistic about fuel right now. I see a lot of really great things happening in the nuclear fuel market. It's a long time to spin up. 2 years ago, I think most of us would have said financing, although nuclear ecosystem has raised billions of dollars since the president's nuclear executive orders. We've raised $2.5 billion alone in the last year. So for the first time, nuclear can self-finance early assets as opposed to financing them on the back of a ratepayer or a taxpayer, which is very exciting. That's not the long pole in the tent. I no longer believe that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is going to be the long pole in the tent. There is, between the Advance Act and the stuff that this commission is doing, I feel really proud of the way that they're moving. So really for me, and I'm building in 6 different communities: Alaska, Ohio, Tennessee, Texas, and Idaho. And social license matters a lot. So where I see the most questions, it's not truly on supply chain, like what are the inputs to make my reactor? It's what's going to happen to your waste? What's the long-term waste? We all know about Yucca Mountain. And so I think the biggest policy opportunities are around these nuclear innovation life cycle campuses and the back end of the fuel cycle. That's the reshoring of recycling spent nuclear fuel, but also having some solutions around the country for storing nuclear waste and long-term waste at new reactors, which there's policies for the existing fleet, there's not policies for the future fleet. So that is what policy-wise I think has the most opportunity to do something great.
I agree with both of those aspects. I think, especially having been out at Buckley last week and understanding how it's really in the middle of a very large community, the community of Aurora, Colorado. And you think about the students at Aurora High School that are in walking distance from wherever this reactor is going to be. It's the social license, right? It's making sure that we continue, the nuclear industry is known for this, but that we continue in that spirit to engage all of the stakeholders, and that includes the local communities. Part of why I joined Radiant was because it's a microreactor that we are going to mass produce in the state of Tennessee, and we did break ground in April, and so we've got dirt moving, and we're striving for completion of our fueling facility in January of next year. But it was to demonstrate that, one, you can mass produce this, and two, as you deploy this out into the wild, so to speak, right? You get this out, and the communities start to use it, and they realize this is pretty great. I don't have to turn off my air conditioning on a day like today in DC when it's sweltering and it's muggy, and unfortunately the load on the grid is very high. You don't have rolling brownouts and you won't have blackouts. And so I think the more we can get this technology out into communities that need it and that can benefit from it, the better reputation, the easier it is to get this social license. And then what I do want to close with, because we opened with as well, was how it compares to gigawatt scale reactors. All of us are benefiting from what gigawatt scale plants have done for the world. And so they certainly, we wouldn't be here if it weren't for the success of those plants, and those plants absolutely need to continue to operate, continue to have license extensions. All of that is very, very important. This is on top of that.
So with our last few minutes, I wanted to ask about exports. The stories I've heard of how Rosatom and the Russians wine and dine newcomer countries to get them to buy VVERs is pretty remarkable, and I haven't heard many examples from the west of anything similar. And likewise, the Chinese are starting to enter the game. I mean, they just made a big bid in Serbia. They're trying to compete with us in Saudi Arabia, and they obviously have been very competent at building reactors at home. So briefly, and I'll start with you, Dr. Baranwal, what can we do to catch up beyond, obviously we need to improve our own competencies with deploying them domestically, but how do we begin that outreach now, and how do we win on, the global competition?
Sure. So, and the reason why this is important is that we have seen very much so over the past several years how important energy security and energy independence is to nations around the world. And so it is important for us to certainly show up and start having those conversations. Frankly, we cannot today compete at the same level as the Chinese and the Russians because of exactly what Adrienne talked about. We can offer the fuel, we can offer the reactor, we can offer the services and the decommissioning. We don't have a place to store their used fuel permanently. And so if once that policy is addressed, then we can absolutely, on a level playing field, compete with Russia and China. Until then, we're at a disadvantage. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be out there trying to deploy globally. We are. It's a matter of showing up, developing those relationships, and emphasizing the energy independence that U.S. technology can provide.
First of all, exporting nuclear machines and any nuclear technology is very hard, and it's very hard for a reason. We need to ensure that there's safety safeguards around proliferation and that we maintain a global standard, and those things are there for a reason. But it is very hard. And for most of us in the advanced reactor and Gen 4 space, there is enough interest here in the US for us to do first of a kind, second of a kind, nth of a kind, and prove out our technology and bend that cost curve into a way that we're really competitive. So I think, unfortunately, what I'm seeing is we're spending a meaningful amount of time making sure that the international regulatory bodies don't start favoring other nations. And I think that is a really good use of time. And I'm very hopeful that OKLO reactors will go abroad, and especially to friendly countries. And we're eager to find those opportunities. But we're also heads down making sure that the U.S. market is getting SMRs, getting advanced technology deployed as early as possible. And so it's a tough balance because those countries are entirely focused on exports, and it's beating us at that game.
So briefly, the Army is not particularly interested in exporting the technology, right? However, we are particularly interested in increasing that domestic capability. So the more companies that are interested in doing this from a national security perspective, the more opportunity we have to introduce resiliency. And as that commercial market continues to grow and develop, it facilitates those types of things, right? So the Army, again, we're not interested in exporting it, but we are interested in growing that capability within the domestic market at home, and the Army is facilitating that through the Janus program.
Well, may NATO run on the American atom. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for being here at the American Imperative Summit.
Thanks.